Would have been hilarious because he has no idea what he's building. Well, 6-foot boat seems like it's good enough. Okay. You're not going to be able to even save your whole family with that. And so he prepared an ark for the salvation of his household. That the way that he prepared it added to the fact that it saved him. And I think that is a part of this, that he did it a certain way according to God's warning and what God told him to do. Okay. So, verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. So Abraham was called of God to leave the Ur of the Chaldeans and go to a land that God would soon show him, Genesis 12:15. That's what this is going to be referencing. And so when God calls him, he obeyed and he went. He was willing to go. It's like if God showed up to us and spoke to us and said, I'm going to need you to abandon everything that you know, everything that you have. I need you to go to Mexico, maybe, or across the border out of your country. Let's just say that, wherever that is. And I need you to go, and I'm not going to tell you where to go. I'm just going to tell you a direction. Just follow my voice and just go. Would that be easy? It'd be one of the hardest things you have to do because you are grounded and you feel like the things that hold you firm are the things that you have. I have my dad. I have my house. I have my family. I have this land that we are a part of, this community. And God says, Abram, I need you to leave all that. And I'm not telling you where we're going, but I will tell you how to get there. And he's like, okay. And he's willing to go. That's why he's the father of faith. He obeyed God and went even though he did not know where he was going. And once again, there's these same elements going on. And that is why it's by faith. Because he went out not knowing where he was going. Therefore, who was he depending on? He was depending on God in those moments. For God to be truthful, for God to lead him. In faith is mentioned in Genesis 15, verse 6, and in Genesis 26, verse 5, his obedience is emphasized. So if you're taking notes, 26, verse 5, in one place they're saying this is the faith of Abraham. And in another chapter, it's saying this is how obedient Abraham was. And it speaks to his righteousness in that way. So it's something to think of. So verse 9, we have it again. By faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise, in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac, Jacob, and fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So Abraham lived as a sojourner or an alien in a land he did not own. He never owned any land in Canaan, except for the land of the burial plot, the cave at Machpelah near Hebron. That is the only bit of portion that he owned. The rest was in tents. That's what he was in. He was in tents with Isaac, Jacob, and fellow heirs of the same promise. So what is he getting at? We don't know yet. We don't know where he's going yet. Besides this, by faith he lived as an alien in the land of promise. Well, why would it be by faith? Because he didn't get the land yet. That's one of the things that's being... He was promised that this was his land, the land of Canaan, that God would give it to him. He didn't say when he would give it to him, but he said, this is going to be your land. And the promise was wrapped up in another promise. What was the other promise? It's the more well-known promise. Nations, the descendants. This is going to be you and your people's land, right? It's not just going to be Abraham's land. It's going to be all who come from you are going to be blessed in this land who belong to me. This will be your land. So when is that coming? Well, you know it's not coming for quite a long time because Abraham doesn't even have a kid yet. He doesn't even have a child yet, so he can't expect all of a sudden have this land. God said, I will give it to you. And he didn't know when. Not only was it he was not knowing where he was going, but he didn't know when he was no longer going to be in tents and where he could put down stakes in the ground and say, this is now my land that I can build on. And the fellow heirs of the same promise dealt with the same thing, where they didn't say that this is just their land. They had an outlook about it that they were still wanderers. So the word promise here is one that really is being pointed out and observed, and he wants us to observe. He keeps bringing it up. And so that's going to be important for the next section, because he's going to keep pointing out this word. But if you remember what was said in Hebrews 10:36, and I think it's important, so I'm going to write it right here. Hebrews 10:36. He says, paraphrasing, but those who have done the will of God will obtain what is promised. Right? So that's important, because there's this way that God is, and the Hebrew writer is trying to tell you the way that he is. And he says, don't you know that those who obey him and obey his will, that they will receive what he promises? You know, God is going to deliver if you do what he says. That doesn't mean perfection. It means in the sense of you have an agreement that he is your God and that you are his people. And if you continue to look at him and cling to him as your God, he is going to provide for you as his people. It's a promise of God. He will deliver. God will deliver every time. And if it doesn't happen, just know that either that's on us or God is still delivering even in the midst of the shadows, which is very hard for us to understand. That even in the midst of pain and suffering or the shadows or the pit, God is there. And he is still not done with you. He's not done with your situation. Joseph could have looked at himself in the pit and said, God is not with me. But God was. Daniel could have easily said, God is not with me. But he was. These figures that we know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God is not with us, but he was. So even in harsh, dark, painful moments, God is a God who is a rewarder of those who hang on, and those who will receive his promises. Okay, so he was looking for a city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Abraham, I'll highlight this. So this is kind of saying why he was, well, I'll let you tell me. What do you think this verse is going back and kind of saying right there? He's giving clarification, right? And the clarification is that Abraham was not just wandering faithlessly or wandering going, God, when are you going to give me mine? When are you going to give me what belongs to me? In fact, what do you see specifically with Abraham and his nephew Lot?
He always took the least.
He took the least. Abraham said, look around, Lot. Our company is too big together. And we've been blessed. You need to go your way, I'll go my way. And he says, basically gives Lot the first chance to look around and says, whatever direction and whatever land you want, you go that way and I'll go the other way. And it says Lot looked and he saw the best looking land. And he went, I think I'll take that. And Abraham said, good luck, and went the other way. And God richly blessed Abraham, right? So he took his portion as God himself. He was not worried about the land. He was not worried about all the inheritance of the land. He was looking at God as his portion. If I have God, then so be it. Wherever I go, that will be where I will dwell. So he was satisfied to live as a sojourner in tents because he patiently looked for the place God would supply for him. Although God is the maker of the whole world, which if you go back to verse 3, we kind of covered that. He is this God who spoke everything into what it is today out of nothing, out of what we can't see. And although he is the maker of the whole world, he is also the maker of this city he's looking for. So one of the things he's saying by pointing that out is he's saying he's looking for a city that has foundations whose architect and builder is God. You know, if God is the builder of everything, then what does he actually mean by this verse? What is this? You know, you could say that any land that he's on was built by God. But what is he's saying by this? In verse 10. Has foundations whose architect and builder is God. What is he clinging to?
Clinging to a hope of something that he doesn't have, and
Yes.
he's never going to have in his life.
Yep.
So he, I believe that Abraham saw that there was an afterlife,
Yep.
and believed that,
I do
and
too.
that's what his hope was built on.
I do too. I think he basically had the outlook that if God is my portion and I die before I have, this is my land and this is where I'll dwell, then he says, then God's still going to give it to me after. And he's thinking in his mind that there is this place that God is leading me to that may not even be of this world, that it's going to be in the next. And I'm looking for that city. I'm looking for the foundation whose architect and builder is God. You know, on earth, there are not just things that God has built, but man has built. Man has constructed the Tower of Babel. That was not God. He made all the things in the world that man uses to build it, but man constructed that. But Abraham was looking for a city that was entirely made of holiness and constructed by God. And if he's the architect and builder, it's assuming he's there as well. And that's where Abraham wanted to be. So he's not living this life for the land inheritance of Canaan. He's living for a greater promised land. By faith, so we got, again, we're going to Sarah. By faith, even Sarah herself received the ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. So we see the same kinds of things. This time, it is that she received an ability to conceive that was not her own. Was not her own. So there's one aspect of faith, and that is the unseen. I'm traveling to a land that I don't know, but I go anyway. I build a boat, whatever that is, because of rain, whatever that is, because God tells me it's coming, right? You go into the unknown because the God who you do know calls you. That's a part of faith. But this other part is that you're able to do, you're trusting in God, and because of your trust in God, you are able to do things that you should not be able to do. That in the past especially, that is this beyond you, right? Beyond what you can do. Faith, you have to believe that your faith in God is making you, transforming you into something that you could not have ever become without it. You have to believe it. That is the direct, you may not be in your 80s and 90s and have a baby like Sarah or Elizabeth. You're not, that's not going to be the way that God shows you that he is fulfilling his greatness today. But the point and the lesson is faith is something that makes you and helps you to do things that you could have never done without it. If you don't believe that, then your faith is very weak. And your faith will not move mountains. That's what do you think that whole idea is? I don't have a verse on me, but that would be a really good thing to write here. Faith moves mountains. Can you move a mountain? Could Peter, could James, John, could any of the apostles move mountains? What do you think God was saying? What do you think Jesus was saying in that moment? Just a little bit of faith and you can move mountains. You got to understand that faith is so powerful and that God is a great help to those who trust in him. And if your faith is anything else than that, to think that, my life is not going to be much different from those who don't believe in Jesus, then you, my friend, have not been around someone who actually gives their life to Jesus. Because that would be people who you read about in Scripture, like Paul. Paul surrendered his life to Jesus. So did the other apostles. And it said that they turned the world upside down. Okay? Jesus is not this minimal thing in your life. He's everything. And that's one thing you can't get out of Hebrews 11 without seeing that what kind of faith do you have? Because this is the kind of faith that God says, this is the way of faith, that you may not build a boat. God may not call you to leave all of your land and people. He may not call for you to give everything up. But faith is the idea that there is sacrifice and there is trust in God much more than trust in yourself or anything of the world. And it pushes you to go where it is unseen. And God allows you to do and receive abilities to do things you could never do without him. So that's incredibly, we're thankful to God for that. It's incredibly encouraging. This was God's promise to Abraham, a promise realized by faithful obedience. So Genesis 22, if you need the verse, Genesis 22:17, he says, "Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand, which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies." God says, I am going to multiply your seed. Sarah acted by faith along with her aged husband, trusting in the promises of God. Maybe not at first, but she got there. Trusting in the promises of God that he is who he says he was, and that he could do this. Whether it was the assurance of inheriting the promised land, or the assurance of the coming of the child of promise, or the multiplying of Abraham's descendants like the seashore, these promises in Genesis had very far-reaching implications beyond the events at hand, and will not come to fruition completely for a long time. So it's like the promise that his descendants would be greatly blessed by his seed. Well, we know that that's not talking about well, my mind just went blank. Esau, nope. Is it Israel? Why is my mind? Jacob, who is the one in between Abraham and Jacob? Thank you, my word. All I could think of was Isaiah. Okay. So all we know about Isaac in this way is that, he is the son of promise. And it's the promise that God will fulfill in his life. In fact, one of the only promises that he did receive from God was the son of promise. And it came pretty quickly, right? And that's really all you need when you're in your 90s and God says you're going to have a son. And you say, pfft. And then a son comes along, you're like, okay, well, now we're cooking. Whatever that God says, I'm going to do. But even before Isaac came along, Abraham already left, you see. He already left and went out. He already showed great faith, but a faith that continued to grow all the more. And so these far-reaching things was the son of promise did come in the time of Abraham, but there was a double prophecy. And whenever God says that the nations would be blessed, he was not talking about the seed of Isaac. He was talking about the seed of Jesus. And that's how all nations will be blessed by this seed. Well, that doesn't come for a long time. That promise is not fulfilled for Abraham for a long time. But Abraham knew God would do it. Just as he knew God would give them the full land of Canaan. He knew it. He didn't have to receive it to believe it's true. And that's a tremendous faith. It's a tremendous faith. He goes to his deathbed knowing the God who did what he did with Isaac and who has followed Abraham into the unknown and has become his God. And that was enough for him. And it was enough for Sarah. Therefore, there was born even of one man, and him as good as dead at that, as many descendants as the stars of heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. This, of course, is the promise of God. And so, many descendants, and as the stars of heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. That is how many people came from one man who is as good as dead. Oh, that's not. I don't think you need to go to an 80 or 90-year-old and say you're as good as dead. But what it means is, it means that when it comes to reproductive organs, when it comes to having another child, they were as good as dead. They were. There was literally nothing in Abraham's mind or Sarah's mind that said, we could do that by our own power. Sarah laughed because it was ridiculous. She was caught completely off guard. That's why God didn't just sit here and crush her. He just says, you laugh. You'll name your son, I laugh. God has a sense of humor, I guess. And so, it is very hard to believe that. And why would she? It's just very hard to believe at that point. It shows a tremendous faith on Abraham for just kind of saying, how is that possible? Or just kind of with this joy saying, could it be, Lord? But from one man who was as good as dead, many descendants and an innumerable amount of people came from. And that is the power of our God. Verse 12, we kind of went over. I think we covered it as good as we need to. So verse 13, all these died. Okay, so all these died, right? And that is like depressing almost, because he just made a huge deal of this word right here. And I wish I would have kept these verses on the same page so you could see that. But he just made a huge deal of the word promise. And he said it over and over again throughout this chapter, throughout these couple of verses. And basically that these people, specifically Abraham, Sarah, his sons, Isaac and Jacob, all of them were given this promise of a land and an inheritance. And yet he gets to this verse and he says, all these died without receiving the promises. Like, wow, that's not very encouraging. Yet there's this part. In faith. They died in faith without receiving the promises. It shows that they trusted in God. They knew who he was. They didn't need continual signs. They didn't need continual convincing. They were convinced. They believed God. And they should, because as this starts to fan out, by the time you come to Jacob, you should really start believing that God is in control and that he is making your descendants multiply by a lot. Like, we're getting the 12 tribes of Israel and so many people coming out of that seed. First it's Isaac. Then Isaac has 2 sons. And those 2 sons, Jacob alone, has tons of children. And those children will have children. That, if you just did a mathematical breakdown of how many people that is, that's exponentially huge. That's a ton of people. Just looking at my grandma, I would look around sometimes at Thanksgiving and connect how many people came from my grandma. And there'd be 70 people sitting here in this room. And she'd have a necklace with 20 grandkids and this many whatever. And it's just, she adds to this necklace. And it just speaks to the fact it's one lady. And all these people have come that God has blessed through this woman. That's one. So all these descendants and all these people will have children, and they lived longer, and they were more fruitful, and they could have a bunch of kids. You could see how it would become innumerable very fast. All these died, but they died in faith. Having seen them, this is really neat. So the word that he goes back to here is seen, because faith is without seeing, right? And having welcomed them from a distance. So basically, they didn't see. They didn't see, because it's play on words that faith is going after the things unseen, going where God calls you, and God called them out, and they, having seen them, as in they understood the promises, and that was enough, because they welcomed them as though they were theirs without receiving them. Now, you may think that has about 0 application to you today. And it has direct application to you today. What have you been promised, but that you have not yet received? A home in heaven. The exact same thing. The exact same thing that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Sarah were clinging to is your promise too. You may look at those people and say, how could they live all that time in faith in a promise that they have not yet been given or rewarded yet? That's what you do every day. You are marching to Zion. You are marching forward to heaven. And you believe in the promises that Jesus has given you because you believe in Jesus. And because of that, even though it is not yours yet, you count it as though it already is. Because it is. You march forward with faithfulness. And so this is beautiful. Having welcomed them from a distance. How could they do that? The exact way that you welcome the blessing of heaven from a distance. It's what we do. It's what faith is. I don't have to be in heaven. I don't have to see it to know that God has given it to me. I have faith in him and who he proves himself to be over and over again. And so I march into the unknown because he is there. And I am able to do things that I could not do on my own because he is with me. And so I go to a place that he hasn't even given me yet, but I count it as my own because he has given it to me. So this has a lot of application for us. Having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on earth. This was them saying that they were looking for something else. And that's what he's going to go on to say in verse 14. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. So God has prepared for us a promised land, just as he's prepared for them. And it's this final rest that he's talked about in Hebrews 4. And it's not necessarily a physical place, but a heavenly one that God has prepared for us. It's an eternal home, John 14:3. And so we welcome that from afar as we draw closer to it. But the writer characterizes people of faithfulness as sojourners because we're not home yet. If Jesus is preparing us a place, a home with him in heaven, John 14:3, then what does that mean about where you're at today? It is not your home, right? If Jesus is preparing your home, then where you're at right now, and it's not with him in heaven, is not your home. So we are sojourners. We walk this land wanting our home, and we make ourselves in these little tents all the time. Or we don't. Or we put down our stakes in the ground, and we call this home. And then we're in trouble. We're in trouble because this is not the place you want to stay. This is not the place that will fulfill you. And if you call this home, then God is not making room for you in the place he's preparing for you. And that's something that we have to consider. Verse 16, or actually, so we talked about verse 15. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country which they left, they would have had opportunity to return. If they had been thinking of Mesopotamia as their home which they were seeking, they could have turned around at any time and went back there. But that's not where they were trying to go. Their thoughts were higher and greater than the place of the Chaldeans. Home, then, for such people as this is not the place they left in order to pursue God's will, but the place where obeying God will lead them to. That's something that we got to wrap our minds around. Home is this idea that we are not home yet, that God leads us away from what we call home, and that wherever God leads us to, that's where home is, because he will lead us to him. Faithfulness always leads home. Remember, the writer earlier reminded us that we have fled to take hold of the hope set before us, Hebrews 6:18. We do not shrink back or go back to that from which we fled. We press towards a new home. Verse 16. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. So now he just comes out and says it. You know, he's been kind of up here. We didn't know exactly what he meant by seeking a country of their own. And even the verses before it, that they knew they were looking for a foundation and architecture that was built by God. And so now he's saying that was heaven. That's what they're aiming for. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So all of that, he now says, therefore, with all that being said, all this about faith and promises and who they were, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Why? For he has prepared a city for them. He's saying, I absolutely am not ashamed to call you my people and to allow you to call me your God if you're willing to call home the place where I lead you. That's really heavy, because we like to call home wherever we're comfortable, and we like to make home wherever we're at. But God says, choose to continue to live as sojourners and let God bring you home truly. And that will take faith. and he's preparing a place, and we have to cling to him while he does so. We have one more minute. We'll get into just Hebrews 17 and 18. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. And it was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. Okay. So by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. So the severest test to prove Abraham's faith was the command for Abraham to offer up his only son, Genesis 22:1, or his begotten son, I should say. We'll get to that in a bit. And I just want to put that out there. We're out of time. It's 10:15. I just want to put that out there of next week's verses. I am hopeful that we'll pick up a gear. We'll probably get a lot more through Hebrews 11. And this is some excellent text that we're going to spend some time on and really dive into. One last thing that I'll say is, if you notice the bulk of Scripture that we've just covered for the entire class, who was it mainly surrounding? Abraham. Abraham is the father of faith. He did things that the Hebrew writer keeps coming back to. Oh, and also he did this. Oh, and also he did this. Oh, and also he did this. And all of them are just a continual building of some of the most testing of situations that he was put through. This being the pinnacle of the testing. And Abraham passing that test with flying colors. So we'll talk more about that next week. Thank you for your patience. Appreciate it.